The scent of cinnamon was still lingering in the kitchen that morning when my phone vibrated on the counter. It was just a small, quiet sound, but it shifted the entire course of my life. Of course, I didn't know that yet. I was still wearing my robe, humming a tune, and comfortably pretending that the last 5 years hadn't been leading up to this exact moment. My name is Yolette. Yo to most. I've been Delroy Calloway's wife for 6 years and stepmom to his son Dorian since he was 19. I've never asked them for a thing. Not because I'm humble, but because that's just how I'm wired. That morning, our bags were already by the door. 3 suitcases, 2 of them mine, packed for a 7-day cruise to celebrate Dorian's college graduation. It was Delroy's idea, Delroy's gift. Or so everyone said. I never corrected them. I picked up the phone, smiling before I even saw the message, thinking it was probably Karen checking in to wish us a safe trip. It wasn't. Dorian's name was right at the top. Plans changed. You aren't coming with us. I only want my real mother there, not you. A woman like you doesn't belong on a trip like this. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. I understood perfectly. I read it twice because somewhere deep down, I was still hoping those words would rearrange themselves into something a little kinder. They didn't. Erlene, his biological mother, wasn't on the trip. She hadn't even been invited or mentioned in the planning. Dorian knew that. He wasn't stating a fact. He was handing me a blade and asking me to notice how sharp it was. Delroy was by the door, tying his shoes. I didn't say a word. I just walked over and handed him the phone. He read it. I watched his jaw tighten, saw a flicker of something complicated cross his eyes, and then he looked away, staring at the suitcases and giving a single nod. That was it. Just a nod. No, let me call him. No, that's absolutely not happening. Just a slow, tired nod, like a man agreeing with a weather report. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I took the phone back and walked to the stove to flip the last piece of turkey bacon, as if my entire world hadn't just been dismantled in under 10 seconds. A door inside me had already started to close, though I hadn't had the chance to notify the rest of myself yet. Delroy didn't bring it up. Neither did I. We moved around each other in that kitchen like 2 people choreographed to avoid a conversation neither of us wanted to have. 20 minutes later, Dorian's horn honked outside. Delroy grabbed his suitcase, kissed my cheek just like always, and said, "We'll talk when I get back." We would talk, I thought, just not in the way you're imagining. I stood at the window, watching the car back out of the driveway. My husband in the passenger seat, my stepson behind the wheel. Neither of them looked back at the house, at me, or at any of it. The second they turned the corner, I picked up my phone again. Not to cry and not to call Delroy. I scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in nearly a year and hit call, waiting for Karen Whitfield to pick up. She answered on the second ring. "Yo, is everything okay?" I looked around my kitchen. This house, paid off in full, with only my name on the deed. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Is your company still buying homes on Vesper Lane?" Karen needed proof of income and a list of monthly debts before she could give me an offer. "Standard procedure for a quick close," she said. "I need to see what's tied to this property." So I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and let my cold coffee sit. I opened the one app in my life that never lies. My bank account. I wasn't looking for anything, really. I was just gathering documents. But documents don't lie either. I started scrolling, and the account began to tell its story. $340, auto-drafted, every month on the 2nd. Dorian's car payment. It wasn't a loan I co-signed. It was a bill I'd quietly added to my own account 2 years ago because Delroy said his credit wasn't where it needed to be, and he didn't want his son taking the bus to his internship. I never told Dorian where the money came from. Delroy begged me not to. "Let me handle it my way," he'd said. I let him. I kept scrolling. $11,200 pulled 6 weeks ago, the full cost of the cruise. Including Dorian's cabin, the one Delroy called a gift for my son's graduation, in front of the whole family at Easter dinner. I was sitting 2 seats away, and I said nothing. Correcting him in front of everyone felt meaner than just letting him enjoy the spotlight. I kept going. $4,200 transferred directly to Delroy 3 years ago, with a note I'd typed myself, "Temporary loan, until the contract kicks in." The contract never kicked in. He never brought it up again. Neither did I. I leaned back, letting the numbers at the bottom of the screen settle in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't know the money was gone. I knew exactly where every cent had gone. But for the first time in 6 years, I was looking at all those numbers at once, and I let myself feel the weight of them. This wasn't generosity anymore. Once I saw it laid out like that, it was a pattern, an undertow, silent and steady, moving in only one direction. And I was the only one standing in the water. I thought of Dorian's text again. A woman like you. A sound escaped my throat, half a laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. He had stated the truth in the cruelest way possible. He had no idea. He honestly had no clue whose money was keeping his life afloat. That wasn't his fault. That was a door someone else had deliberately closed. I closed the banking app, opened my email, and started attaching the documents Karen needed. Bank statements, the deed, the inheritance documents from when my mother passed. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I expected to be shaking. I had barely typed Karen's name in the subject line when my phone buzzed on the table. Genevieve, Delroy's mother. I almost didn't open it. Almost. But an instinct pushed me to look. Did you get everything sorted before they left? I read it twice, just like I'd read Dorian's text. Sorted? As if she knew there was something that needed sorting. As if she'd heard, guessed, or simply assumed, but hadn't said a word to either of them before they walked out that door this morning. I turned the phone face down and didn't reply. While I was still working on the email to Karen, a folder of old photos in my downloads caught my eye. I'd backed them up from my phone months ago. Last year's Thanksgiving was right at the top, time-stamped and waiting. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The first photo was of the table. The table I'd set with the good china, the turkey I'd roasted for 6 hours, the catering platters I'd rushed to order when Genevieve's side of the family showed up unexpectedly. 12 more people than Delroy told me to prepare for. $410 in extra costs, charged to my card that day so no one would go hungry at my table. Nobody thanked me for that. I didn't expect them to. Long before that Thanksgiving, I'd stopped expecting that. The second photo was the one that made me stop. It was the family portrait. Everyone gathered by the fireplace. Before Dorian's cousin hit the shutter, Dorian suggested rearranging everyone for better lighting. I remembered standing where I was told. Smiling. The kind of smile you have when you don't know what's coming. In the final photo, the one that eventually got framed for Delroy's office and praised by his colleagues, I wasn't in it. Dorian had moved people around to fill a gap, and I had simply been pushed a foot outside the frame, smiling at nothing. I'd noticed it that night. I didn't say a word. I told myself it wasn't worth the tension. Thanksgiving was supposed to be peaceful, and I should be bigger than a photo. Looking at it now, unattached to anything, I understood something I hadn't let myself see that night. It wasn't about the photo. It was never about the photo. It was about how easily I could be moved out of a frame I'd paid to fill, and how easily everyone in that room let it happen. Not one person spoke up for me. Not Genevieve, not Delroy, not even the people watching it happen showed a hint of discomfort. I closed the folder. My hands weren't shaking, but something in my chest went very quiet, the way water goes still before it's about to break. I finished the email to Karen. I attached the statements, the deed, the inheritance papers, and before I could convince myself to soften, I hit send. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone rang. "Yolette, I got everything," she said. "The title is clean. Sole ownership, no liens, no mortgages. If you're ready to move, I can have someone out there to inspect the property as early as tomorrow morning." I looked around my kitchen. This was the kitchen where I'd staged the catering platters no one acknowledged, where I'd read a text calling me less than, where I'd watched a car drive away without me. "Tomorrow morning works," I said. "Are you sure?" Karen's voice softened. "Once we start, this moves fast." I thought about the photo, the $410, the 6 years of standing a foot outside a frame I was paying to fill. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. The next morning at 9, Karen's car pulled into my driveway right on time. I watched her get out with a folder tucked under her arm, followed by a contractor with a tablet, already taking notes before they even reached the front door. "It won't take long," Karen said as she walked in. "Foundation, roof age, major systems. For a cash buy like this, that's all we need." I followed them from room to room, answering questions I'd answered 100 times before, for insurance, for property taxes, for those small things that had never felt this important. The water heater was 4 years old. The roof was done the year my mother passed. No structural issues, no open permits, nothing complex standing in the way of that door I was heading toward. The contractor was done in under 20 minutes. Karen saw him out, came back alone, and sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd opened my banking app 2 days earlier. "I don't want to waste your time," she said. "The house is clean. It's your personal property. For us, this is a very fast turnaround. If you're serious, and I mean really, truly serious, Yolette, because once I start this process, I won't slow down for hesitation. I can have this closed in 5 to 6 days. 5 to 6 days. I did the math. Delroy and Dorian's 7-day cruise was only 2 days in. 5 days from now, I'd be well ahead of them. 6 days would give me plenty of time. "I'm serious," I said. Karen stared at me for a second, like an old friend trying to see if the person in front of her was really who she thought she knew. "I believe you," she said. "I just need to hear from you what this means before I push forward." "It means I'm selling my house," I said. "It means I'm done explaining myself to people who never explain themselves to me." She nodded slowly, opened the folder, and pushed a preliminary offer across the table. The number at the top made my chest tighten, not from doubt, but because it suddenly felt so real on paper, no longer just a thought in my head. I signed where she pointed. My hand didn't shake. Karen packed up her documents, stood up, and stopped at the door, as if something were caught on the tip of her tongue. "Does Delroy know?" she asked. The question hung between us. Not because I didn't have an answer. I'd had the answer since that phone vibrated on the counter, since that nod, since the moment that car drove away without me. "This house was never his," I said. "He doesn't need to know." Karen looked at me a moment longer, gave a single nod, as if that answer settled something in her mind too, and let herself out. I stood in the kitchen alone, listening to her car back out of the driveway, and felt the first slight click of a door closing deep inside me. Not a slam, not dramatic, just a finality. That afternoon, an email came from Karen's office. "Standard form," she said. "We need a brief explanation for any withdrawals over $2,000 in your financial records." One was highlighted in yellow, a $3,000 withdrawal from 18 months ago. No memo, no explanation. I didn't need a form to remember what that money was for. Even without the form, I remember that day perfectly. Finals week, Dorian's car broke down on I-285. The transmission went without warning. He panicked and called Delroy, and 20 minutes later, Delroy called me. His voice tight with that specific tone he used whenever money was involved. "I don't have it right now," he said. "Not unless I pull it from somewhere I don't want to touch." Before he even finished the sentence, I'd already transferred the funds. $3,000 that day, no strings attached. I didn't ask for a thank you, I never did. The only thing I asked was that Dorian know this money came from a real place, from someone who cared enough to help without being asked twice. Delroy promised he would tell him. "Of course," he'd said. "I'll tell him it's from us. Us, not me." I'd noticed the word then, but I let it go the way I always did. 2 weeks later, at a cookout I'd spent all morning cooking for, I overheard Dorian laughing with his cousin Mars about how he'd almost failed his exams. "But my dad came through," he said. "Don't know where he pulled $3,000 from, didn't even ask. That's my old man." I was standing 6 feet away, holding a serving spoon, and Dorian didn't turn around once to include me in that sentence. No glance, no, "actually, thanks to," just my husband's name sitting in the spot that should have been mine. I felt it then. A sharp, quick sting that vanished almost as fast as it came, because I'd talked myself out of it before it could settle. That's just how Delroy and his son are, I told myself. Men don't always express things the right way. That doesn't mean the truth isn't there. I'd believed that. I truly did. You have to believe certain things to keep loving people the way you decide to. Sitting at my kitchen table now, with the cursor blinking in Karen's form, I tried to recall if, in the dozens of conversations since, Delroy had ever, even for a second, corrected that story. A holiday, a cookout, a quiet moment. Actually, that was your stepmom, not me. I stayed with that thought longer than I expected. I couldn't find a single time. Not once in 5 years. Delroy never gave back the credit that belonged to me. He kept turning we into he, over and over, and I let every instant slide past me like the weather. I typed a short, clean explanation into Karen's form. Personal loan, family emergency, no further action required. Then I clicked submit. I leaned back, hands flat on the table, and let myself feel an emotion I'd never allowed myself to feel while it was happening. Only afterward, only in private. I was being deliberately erased. Quietly, repeatedly. And every time I chose peace over the truth, I was helping him do it. I was rinsing the coffee pot when my phone rang. Even now, it was a habit I couldn't break. Karen again. The title company finished the preliminary check, she said. Everything is clean. If you're okay with it, I can lock in the closing date for 6 days from today. 6 days. Delroy and Dorian had one more day at sea before the ship turned back for port, followed by a day of travel home. 6 days from now would have me out a full day before they walked through that front door. Lock it in, I said. Done, Karen said. I'll send the documents tonight. I put the phone down and stared into space, the way you do when you turn a thought in your head into a date on a calendar. My mind drifted to a Christmas dinner 2 years ago. I'd hosted, cooked everything, paid for the wine, and decorated the table with a runner my mother had left me. Genevieve was at the far end of the table, holding court as usual, telling stories about Delroy's childhood to cousins who listened to her every word. During dessert, the talk turned to family, to belonging, and to whose blood ran through which branch of the family tree. Genevieve looked at me across the table and gave me that signature smile, the one she used right before delivering a jab wrapped in a joke. Oh, Yolette is wonderful, of course, she'd said, but it's just different, isn't it? When it's real family, real history, real values passed down through generations. You know what I mean? A soft, relaxed laugh went around the table. The kind of laugh people make when they don't realize, or don't care, that they've just drawn a line and left someone on the wrong side of it. I looked at Delroy. In that pause, I gave him every chance to say something, anything. Mom, that's not fair. Or just 4 words. Yo's family, too. That was all he had to do. But he laughed instead, quietly, easily, the same laugh as everyone else, as if his mother had told a joke about the weather, not about his wife. I laughed too, because that's what I was trained to do. I changed the subject to dessert, and the night passed as if nothing had happened. Nothing happened. To everyone at that table, no matter how many tiny cuts were left, nothing had ever happened. That was the part I hadn't let myself see until just now, standing in my kitchen, locking in a closing date for 6 days away. It was never just Dorian. It was never just that one nod in this kitchen. It was Genevieve's smile. It was Delroy's laugh. It was the whole family, silently agreeing on exactly how much space I was allowed to occupy. I picked up my phone and texted Karen, 6 days is fine. Send everything tonight. I'm ready. She replied in a minute, process is moving. No turning back after this. I replied with 2 words that came from the bottom of my heart. I know. Karen's documents were in my inbox at 7 the next morning. 20+ pages of terms I'd had no reason to learn until 2 days ago. Title transfers, disclosure forms. The closing date was in bold at the top, 6 days from now. I printed them out because some things deserve a real pen, not a fingertip swiping a screen. I sat at the kitchen table and read them slowly. Not because I doubted anything, but because I wanted to feel every page, every line where a signature was required. There was only one name. No Delroy, no joint ownership, none of that. Just mine, exactly as it had always been legally. Exactly as it was about to be in every sense that mattered. After I signed, I walked through the house, room by room, the way you do when you're saying goodbye to a place. But I wasn't saying goodbye to the house. I was saying goodbye to the version of me that used to live in it. The living room where I'd hosted Christmas dinners and endured Genevieve's smiles without blinking. The kitchen where I'd cooked for Thanksgiving, catered extra meals, and made Easter breakfast for a family that cut my image out of their memory. Dorian's old room at the end of the hall, kept for visits that rarely happened now. The bed I'd bought him, still made with the sheets I'd picked out myself. None of it tugged at my heart the way I'd expected. I'd been waiting for the grief, waiting for tears, for hesitation, for the moment my hand would hover over the signature line, unable to move. It never came. Instead, there was a quieter, steadier feeling, the feeling of setting down a heavy bag I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 6 years. This wasn't a loss. For the first time in a long time, this was a door I was closing entirely on my own terms. I scanned the signed documents and sent them back to Karen. Her reply came in minutes. Received. We are officially in the final phase. Once the title check clears, I'll confirm the closing details. I put the phone down, stood there staring at nothing for a while, and then opened the family account app, the one Delroy and I used for shared subscriptions. Cloud storage, a music account none of us had touched in months. I found the entertainment package, opened in Delroy's name but paid for by a card linked to both of us. My finger hovered over it just long enough to remember Genevieve's smile at that Christmas table. Then I clicked cancel. Subscription terminated. No further charges will be incurred. Somewhere out on the ocean, beyond the horizon of my kitchen window, that cancellation notice was sitting in a queue, waiting for a signal strong enough to deliver it. A few days from now, maybe when the crew's Wi-Fi connected to the outside world, Delroy's phone would light up with a notification he wouldn't understand yet. For now, it was just one more wire being cleanly, silently cut. On the other end, nobody would even notice. That afternoon, I was going through an old file box, looking for materials Karen's title company wanted, proof of my mother's original deed, and the inheritance papers from years ago. Buried under them, in a folder I hadn't opened in years, was a stack of old cards, anniversary cards, birthday cards, all in Delroy's handwriting. I almost closed the folder, but I didn't. I pulled out the one from our second year together, written the night he told me about Erlene. Back when our relationship was new, we were lying in bed, and he finally said it out loud, the only time he ever mentioned her. She left because I couldn't keep up, he told me. Emotionally or financially, I was behind on everything. The mortgage, the car payments, Dorian's tuition. She got tired of carrying a husband instead of having one. I remembered holding his hand that night, telling him that the past didn't define him, that the past was in the past. I'd believed him completely. I thought I understood him. Now, sitting in my kitchen surrounded by property documents with only my name on them, I understood something else entirely. Delroy never stopped being the man who couldn't keep up. He just found a way to stop looking like that man. Every cent I quietly slipped to Dorian, every bill I covered without asking for credit. That became the brick Delroy used to rebuild his image. The family pillar he failed to be the first time around was finally standing tall in his son's eyes during his second chance. That cruise wasn't a graduation gift. I saw it clearly now. Like looking at a photo after someone tells you what was happening just outside the frame, everything looked different. It was Delroy's redemption trip, paid for entirely by me, performed for his son. And his son didn't know he was watching his father's second chance, not his own celebration. That was why Delroy never corrected anyone, not Dorian at the cookout, not his mother at that Christmas table. Correcting them would mean admitting he was still the man who'd been left by Erlene. He'd rather have his wife disappear from the story entirely than risk his son seeing him like that again. I sat there, letting it settle, and something that had been unraveled for years finally fell into place. This wasn't passivity. Passivity is accidental. This was a man who quietly drained someone else's lifeblood to protect his own wounds. My phone rang. "Karen, good news," she said. "The title review was faster than expected. No liens, no disputes, nothing to stand in our way. If you want to finish early, I can move the closing date up from 6 days to 3. 3 days. Delroy and Dorian were still somewhere in the middle of the ocean, 2 days from port, having no idea that by the time they stepped on land, their house would belong to someone else. "Move it up," I said. 3 days is perfect." "Done," Karen said. "I'll send the updated documents tonight. Yo, once this is done, there's no turning back. Do you understand?" I looked at the old card still spread out in my hand. Delroy's handwriting looked back at me. Every word on it meant something completely different now than it did the night he wrote it. "I understand better than I ever have," I said. I woke up that morning feeling a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No self-doubt, no hesitation about whether doing this was worth the discomfort that would follow. 2 days until closing. 5 days until Delroy and Dorian's ship docked. The math in my head was clear and absolute. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened the account I'd been avoiding all week. Dorian's car loan. $340 on auto draft, the second of every month. 2 years of steady payments, not once missed and not once thanked. Before I canceled it, I scrolled through the payment history. 24 payments, $8,160, quietly flowing from my account into a loan that never had my name on it. I imagined Dorian behind the wheel, going to his internship, going to school, going to that cookout where he'd mocked his father for pulling money out of thin air. From the very first week he had that car, it had been running on my money, and he never knew whose hands were truly on the steering wheel. When I found the cancel option, there was no hesitation, no internal struggle, no rehearsed excuses. I'd burned through all the grief over the past week. The photo, the cookout, the Christmas dinner, the card. Now this was just the final mechanical step in a decision I'd already made. I clicked cancel. Auto draft terminated. No further payments will be processed. 8 words on the screen. And just like that, I cut the last visible thread connecting my money to their daily lives. What happened next? The late notices, the calls from the lender, Dorian eventually finding out that the car payment wasn't coming from where he thought. That was no longer my business. I closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen silence, waiting to feel something dramatic. Victory, relief, maybe even a hint of guilt. But what I felt was much simpler. It was the steady, mundane feeling of completing a task, moving forward. There was nothing left behind me that deserved another thought. I was rinsing a mug at the sink when I heard a knock at the side door. It was Mrs. Patrice, 2 doors down, carrying a basket of mail. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything, whether she meant to or not. "Brought in some packages from your porch," she said, setting them on the counter. "Didn't want them sitting out there, especially with all the activity at your place." "Activity?" "The moving truck." She nodded toward the street, as if the truck were still there. "Came by yesterday afternoon. 2 guys took some boxes out of your garage. I guess you're finally clearing out that old furniture you mentioned at the cookout last summer." I had never mentioned any furniture to Mrs. Patrice. Not last summer, not ever. "News travels fast around here," she added, all cheer, before patting my arm on her way out. "Half the street is wondering if you're finally renovating." After she left, I stood by the counter, frozen. My heart started racing, a feeling I hadn't had all week. Closing was in 2 days, and the neighborhood knew what was happening before my own family did. I called Karen immediately, half expecting some misunderstanding. "That was my arrangement," Karen said. "I had the crew clear out the things you marked as non-essential during the inspection. Old furniture, things you marked for donation. I should have told you that was happening this week. I apologize if it caught you off guard." It wasn't a mystery then, just another part of the process moving faster than I'd anticipated. The anxiety that had been hanging over me all morning finally settled. With that cleared up, I spent the rest of the day doing what I'd put off since I'd signed the papers, deciding what truly belonged to me. I started in the bedroom closet, taking down boxes I hadn't fully opened in the 6 years I'd lived here, the version of myself from before I knew Delroy. My mother's jewelry box, photos from before the marriage, a quilt she'd made me the year before she passed, wrapped in tissue paper and folded neatly, untouched. I moved through the house with a cold, clear focus I hadn't expected. Nothing with Delroy's name on it. Nothing that had ever belonged to Dorian, not even the small things. He'd given me a coffee mug one Christmas, a card that said, "Love D." Before all this, I would have packed them away without a second thought, as naturally as you clear a table after a meal. One box made me pause. Wedding photos, 8 years of anniversary shots, in frames I dusted every single week. I held that album longer than anything else that day. Not out of doubt, but out of honesty. It had been real once. That part wasn't a lie. Even though everything built on top of it eventually turned into one, I packed it anyway. Not to put on a shelf in a new place, just to keep. Like keeping evidence that something actually happened, even if you've already decided it's over. By evening, everything important was packed. 4 boxes, 2 suitcases, that was it. I'd also confirmed the apartment 2 states away, quietly leased by Karen's sister last week, a new lease with only my name on it, far enough from Atlanta that this family wouldn't think to look for me there. I was taping the last box when my phone lit up. I almost ignored it. But an instinct made me look. It was Dorian's name, a new update, a photo. He and Delroy on the top deck of the cruise ship, sun behind them, both laughing at something out of the frame. The caption, in his familiar casual handwriting, "Best graduation gift ever, love my dad. 43 likes already." The comments were piling up. "Congrats, bro, so proud of you, your dad is the best." I stared at it for a long time, waiting for that sting from the cookout 18 months ago, that pain I used to swallow and make excuses for. It didn't come. Instead, I felt a sense of distance, like looking at a photo of strangers. Their approval, which had meant so much for 9 years, had suddenly become entirely irrelevant. I turned the phone face down, picked up the tape gun, and sealed the box. That morning, Karen drove me to the title company herself so I wouldn't have to go alone. "I didn't think you should do this by yourself," she said. I didn't argue. The office was smaller than I'd imagined. A quiet conference room, a notary pushing her glasses to the top of her head, a stack of documents neatly labeled and waiting for my signature. No drama, no music, no dramatic pauses. Just paper, ink, and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, counting down the end of a life I was about to close the door on. I signed where the notary pointed. Page after page, my name appearing for the last time on anything related to that house. Title transfer. Final disclosures. A closing statement at the bottom with numbers that didn't feel like the point of this anymore. "There you go," the notary finally said, gathering the signed papers. "Congratulations, the transaction is complete." Complete. I let the word sit in my chest for a moment, testing it the way you test the thickness of ice before you step out onto it. After Karen parked the car, she squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said. "There's no going back now." "I know." I meant it. I had finally made peace with the decision, rather than just fighting against the inevitable. She drove me back to the house for the final time. Not to linger, just to grab the last few boxes waiting by the front door. I stood on the porch for a moment before going inside, looking at the place the way you look at an old photo of yourself. You recognize the image, but you don't recognize the person in it anymore. There were no tears. I had assumed they would come. I'd been bracing for them since that morning 9 days ago when my phone buzzed on this very porch, but there was nothing. Instead, I felt clean and quiet. It was that specific kind of stillness that comes after you've finally paid the price for a decision. I carried the last 2 boxes out myself and put them in the trunk of the car Karen had arranged for me. I stood in the driveway for one last moment, looking back at the house that had belonged to my mother before it was mine. It had held 6 years of a marriage where I gave everything I had, and now it belonged to strangers who would never know what happened within these walls. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave the key under the mat. There were no grand gestures, no parting words. There was nothing left to explain, and nobody left inside who deserved an explanation. By evening, I was on the road, watching the Atlanta skyline shrink in my rearview mirror. The city I'd called home for most of my adult life was folding away into the horizon behind me. My phone sat silently on the passenger seat. There were no missed calls yet. On the other end of this journey, nobody knew what was about to happen. I didn't know when I'd tell anyone where I had ended up. I only knew that as the city lights faded away for good, wherever I was going, I was finally going there just as myself. I drove all night, stopping only twice. Once for gas, and once because my eyes needed a break, more exhausted than my body was willing to admit. By noon the next day, the skyline was long gone, replaced by flat highways, pine trees, and a sense of calm I hadn't realized I was starving for. The apartment Karen's sister helped me rent was on the 2nd floor of a small building near the South Carolina coast. By the time I pulled up, I could already smell the salt in the air. It wasn't fancy. It was clean, simple, and mine. I moved the boxes upstairs one by one. No rush. No one was on the other end of the line wondering where I was. When I opened the door, the apartment was empty. Bare walls, bare floors. That distinct, heavy silence of a space that hasn't decided who it belongs to yet. I placed my mother's jewelry box on the windowsill first. Then the quilt, folded at the foot of a bed that hadn't arrived yet. Then the wedding album, face down in the bottom drawer of a dresser I'd have to buy in the coming days. I didn't hide it, just tucked it away. Like when you put something in storage that you aren't ready to look at, but aren't ready to throw away either. By nightfall, I had unpacked what little I brought and was standing in the center of the new living room. The flattened boxes were stacked by the door. There was nothing left to do but exist in the quiet I had built for myself. I made a cup of tea I didn't really want, just to have something to hold, and sat by the window, watching the last of the light fade over rooftops I didn't recognize. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, nobody needed me to do anything. No bills to pay in secret, no dinner parties to host and foot the bill for, no cruel remarks to endure with a forced smile. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. I reached for it out of habit, then realized it was just a delivery notification. The new mattress I'd ordered earlier would arrive within the week. I let out a short, genuine laugh. After everything, it all came down to a mattress, a delivery date, and a life where the most dramatic thing happening was waiting for furniture. It felt so small, so ordinary. I thought of Delroy and Dorian briefly. They were somewhere out on the water, unaware that the house they were sailing back to no longer existed for them. Thinking of that, I didn't feel a sense of victory. I didn't feel guilty either. I felt something quieter, distance, clean and pure. The kind of feeling you only get when you truly let go of something, rather than just walking away from it. Tomorrow their boat will finally pull into port, ending a 7-day celebration paid for by a woman they had discarded without a second thought. I wasn't sure what the scene would look like when they got home. I only knew, sitting in the dark of my new living room with a cooling cup of tea, that whatever that scene looked like, I wouldn't be a part of it. I wasn't there. I want to be clear about that. Everything I know about that afternoon, I pieced together later from Karen, the new homeowners, and the missed calls that flashed on my screen until they finally stopped. What I'm telling you is based on what Karen saw and what she heard from the new owners. I can't guarantee every word, but the outline, the truth of it, I believe completely. Delroy and Dorian landed in Atlanta just after noon. After 7 days at sea, they were exhausted and suntanned, expecting nothing more than a quiet ride home and a hot shower. Karen told me later that when their ride pulled into the driveway, a moving truck was already there. The new owner's truck was half unloaded, moving things into a house that didn't have a single trace of me left. Dorian thought it was a mistake at first, the wrong address or a confused moving company. But he walked to the front door anyway, the way you do when your body hasn't quite caught up to what your eyes are seeing. A woman he'd never met opened the door. She was polite, though a bit confused herself. She explained that she and her husband had closed on the house 4 days earlier. Sole ownership, she said. Everything was handled cleanly, the paperwork was filed, and there were no issues. I can imagine the silence that followed that sentence. I wasn't there, but I know my husband well enough that I can still picture the look on his face. Delroy was the first one to call me. Karen told me later he was standing in the driveway with his luggage at his feet. I didn't pick up. I watched his name pop up once, twice, and then let it ring until it stopped. Just like I'd let so many trivial things fade away over the last 6 years. He called again and again. Dorian's name started alternating with Delroy's. They took turns, like they were hammering at a door that no longer opened into their world. According to Karen, the neighbors started coming outside to watch. Mrs. Patrice was definitely among them. She'd finally gotten the explanation for the moving truck she'd been wondering about. A small audience gathered on the quiet street, watching 2 men standing in a driveway that wasn't theirs anymore. Phones pressed to their ears, trying to reach a woman who had decided days ago how much more she was willing to give. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. I was sitting 2 states away in an apartment that smelled like fresh paint, knowing exactly what that driveway looked like. Knowing the panic that builds in your chest when the ground you thought would always be there suddenly disappears with no explanation to cushion the fall. My phone buzzed all afternoon, steady and relentless. The number in the corner of the screen kept climbing. I watched it go up without lifting a finger to stop it. 30 missed calls. 40. I flipped the phone over and left it face down on the counter, letting it ring out in the empty apartment. That single sound was the only mark of how completely and decisively I had left. I learned what happened next the same way, pieced together later from people who were there. Delroy and Dorian, with nowhere else to go, took their luggage to Geneva's house that night. The whole family gathered in her living room, trying to figure out what was going on. As it turns out, it was Geneva who unwittingly uncovered the truth. Trying to help her son figure out what to do, she pulled out a folder of recent financial documents, bank statements, and receipts he'd left with her before he left, just in case. Tucked between those papers was a transfer record that none of them expected to see. $3,000. My name was on the account, and the date was the exact day Dorian's car had been fixed. Dorian picked it up first. Karen told me she heard it from Geneva herself, who had been talking about it for days. He stared at it for a long time, then looked up at his father and asked a question that wasn't really a question. "This came from her," he said, "not you." Delroy couldn't answer fast enough. That silence was louder than any explanation. Everything collapsed in that moment. There was no shouting, no screaming, but that slow unraveling was far more terrifying than noise. Dorian started asking about the cruise, the car payments, all the stories he'd heard about where his father's money came from. Piece by piece, Delroy ran out of places to hide the truth. He stood in his mother's living room and admitted it, his voice low, his spirit gone. I had paid for the cruise, every cent, including the cabin Dorian had been so grateful for, the car loan, the emergency funds, all of it. For years I had been quietly covering for him, while Delroy let his son believe he had finally become the pillar of the family he'd failed to be before. Dorian didn't shout. As far as I know, he didn't have the energy for it. He just sat on Geneva's sofa, the bank statement still in his hands, and asked his father a question that supposedly left the whole room dead silent. "Did you ever, even once, let me say thank you to the right person?" Delroy couldn't answer, because there was no answer. I didn't witness it. I only heard about it days later when people needed a place to vent their feelings. But even from 2 states away, I could feel the silence that followed that question. That same silence I had endured for 6 years. Finally, for the first time ever, It landed somewhere else. 2 states away, the number on the phone face down on the counter had kept climbing. I hadn't looked at it for hours. I didn't let myself. When I finally flipped it over, the number stunned me, 56 missed calls. Before I could set it down, it lit up in my hand. Dorian. Later I realized this was the first time he was calling me not out of obligation. I looked at it for a long time, the same way I looked at his text in the kitchen 9 days ago. Then, for the first time since that morning, I answered. You. His voice cracked on the second syllable of my name, as if he'd forgotten how he used to say it. Please, talk to me. I sat by the window, watching the last light fall on a skyline I was still getting to know, letting the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. I'm listening, Dorian. I don't know, he said, his words coming out too fast to organize. About the money, about everything. I swear, if I had known. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. That part was never his fault. Truly, that was someone else's fault. Where are you? He asked. We need to see you. We need to talk about this, about the house, about everything. I didn't answer that question. Some doors, once closed, shouldn't be reopened just because someone finally noticed they were there. The house isn't mine anymore. There's nothing to talk about, I said instead. But I spoke with the new owners before I left. They aren't unreasonable people. They know there are some personal belongings left in the garage, your father's things and some of yours. They've agreed to let you both go pick them up this Saturday between 9 a.m. and noon. Anything left after that gets donated. That's it. His voice cracked again, smaller this time. After everything that's happened, that's all you're going to say? That's all I have to say, I said gently, because this wasn't just his mess to carry, even if he was the one holding the phone. What happened between you and your father, that's for you to resolve. I can't fix 6 years in a single phone call, and I'm not going to pretend I owe you the attempt. He was silent for a long time. I could hear sounds in the background. Geneva's voice, low and uncertain, and beneath that, Delroy, saying nothing. Can I at least tell him you're okay? Dorian finally asked. I thought about that longer than I expected. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to make sure it was the truest one I could give. Tell him I'm doing much better than okay, I said. Tell him I'm finally done waiting for a nod that was never going to turn into words. I heard him let out an unsteady breath on the other end. I'm sorry, he said, for the text, for everything. I know, I said, and I did. Take care of yourself, Dorian. Before he could find anything else to say, I hung up. I placed the phone on the windowsill next to my mother's jewelry box and let the silence of the apartment wrap around me again. Outside, the last of the evening light hit the water 2 blocks away, golden and calm. In my life, it had been too long since anything was allowed to feel that calm. I thought of that kitchen one last time. The smell of cinnamon, that nod, and the feeling of a door closing deep inside me before I even understood what it meant. Now it was closed, completely finally and on my own terms. I picked up my tea again, still warm, and let myself just sit there. Not waiting for anyone, not performing a version of peace for anyone else's benefit, just truly living in it. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. The voice on the other end didn't sound anything like my son-in-law. Mrs. Denzel, I need you to come see me tonight. Please don't bring Darlene and don't tell her I called. My name is Yolanda Denzel. At 68 years old, I've buried my husband, raised 2 daughters alone, and learned one harsh lesson from life. A phone call after 10 p.m. never brings good news. It had only been a month since Delphine's wedding, and the half-written thank you cards were still sitting on my kitchen table. But there was something strange in Conrad's voice that night. It was a tension, like a man choosing his footing carefully while walking on ice. That precise, measured tone made my body move before my brain had even decided what to do. If you're watching this story tonight, please let me know in the comments what time it is where you are, because in my hometown, 11:00 p.m. is when bad news knocks on the door. I asked him what was going on. He said he couldn't explain it over the phone. I asked if something happened to Darlene. He immediately said, no. Too fast. That kind of speed doesn't bring comfort. It only tells you that your question terrified him. Where are you? I asked. He gave me an address on the other side of Memphis, near the old warehouse district by the river. A place I hadn't had a reason to go to in years. I told him that was strange. There was a half-second of silence. Then he laughed. A soft, restrained sound. The kind a man makes when he wants you to think he isn't scared. I just don't want anyone to see us talking, Mrs. Denzel, not yet. I should have asked him why. I should have asked a dozen questions, but I found myself grabbing my robe off the hook and reaching for my car keys. Because in the 18 years I'd known Conrad Hill, 18 years of him handling Theodore's contracts, then mine, then everything else on paper for our family, I had never heard him sound unsure. Not when his own father died, not when he defended Theodore's business partners in court, not even at his own wedding to my daughter, when most grooms would be shaking with nerves. But now he sounded uncertain. I drove, keeping the radio off, my hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, running through every version of bad news one could imagine at that hour. Illness, money, another woman, legal trouble, none of it fit his image. Conrad was a cautious, measured man, a man who read a contract twice before signing his name. When I pulled up, he was already standing outside his car, arms crossed, watching the road behind me as if checking to see if I was being followed. That alone should have told me something. "Thank you for coming," he said, opening the door for me, polite as ever. Perhaps too polite for a man who had just called his mother-in-law out in the middle of the night. I asked him point blank what was going on. He looked at me for a long time, like a man standing on an edge, knowing that once the words were out, there was no taking them back. "Mrs. Denzel," he said quietly, "before I show you this, I need you to know that I went back and forth for nearly 2 weeks on whether or not to tell you." He didn't answer my questions right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and turned it over in his hand as if it had a weight it shouldn't. 2 weeks ago, he said, I was at the house dropping off some documents for Darlene. I heard voices upstairs, her and Roxanne talking. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, Mrs. Denzel. I want you to know that. I told him to just show me. I didn't have the patience for the scenic route to bad news, especially at midnight, especially standing outside in a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. He tapped the screen and turned it toward me. The video was short and the lighting was poor, that dim hallway light that swallows half a face. I heard Roxanne's voice first, sharp words strung together tightly, then Darlene's low voice, talking about the house and before she changes her mind again. The audio cut in and out like the phone was shoved in a pocket, held unsteadily. I heard one of them say my name. I heard Darlene say, "Once it's done, she won't even know what happened." I don't remember if I made a sound. I only remember the phone shaking, and then realizing it was my hand trembling, not his. "I almost didn't show you," Conrad said, his voice dropping, like a man confessing something shameful. I kept telling myself I heard it wrong. I told myself it was nothing, but it's been 2 weeks, Mrs. Denzel. I haven't slept since. I asked him to play it again. He did, slower this time, providing narration over the blurry parts. That's Roxanne saying she's tired of waiting. That's Darlene talking about the house. He filled in the gaps the bad audio left behind, his tone gentle, as if protecting me so I wouldn't have to struggle to identify it myself. I stood in that empty parking lot, my own daughter's voices ringing in my ears. For the first time in a long time, I felt something in my chest split right down the middle. It wasn't anger yet, just disbelief. The kind of disbelief that hollows you out completely before the anger has a chance to arrive. "Why didn't you take this to them?" I asked him. "Why didn't you go to Delphine first? She's your wife." He looked down at the phone, then back at me. For a moment, the look on his face seemed almost exhausted. It's the look a man has when he's carrying something heavier than he's showing. "Because I didn't know how she would react if I confronted her the wrong way," he said. "If I went to her, and I misunderstood even a fraction of what I heard, she'd never forgive me for the accusation. But if I said nothing and let this happen, and you found out later that I knew—" He paused and shook his head. "I couldn't live with you finding out I'd stayed silent, Mrs. Denzel, especially after all your husband did for me, especially after how much the two of you have meant to me." I didn't speak for a long time. I just stood there, looking at the man I'd trusted with contracts, funerals, and even my husband's life work, wondering how the two people I'd raised myself could sit in a hallway and talk about me like that. "I need to think about this," I finally said. He nodded slowly, as if he understood, as if he was relieved I didn't ask him why the recording happened to start at that exact moment. 3 days later, Roxanne called to ask if I wanted to come over for Sunday dinner like always. I told her I wasn't feeling well. It was a lie. And saying that lie was much easier than I expected it to be. The truth was, ever since that night in the parking lot, I had been replaying that video in my head every second. Replaying Delphine's voice, saying I wouldn't even know what happened until it was done. I couldn't sit across from her, hand her the green beans, and pretend everything was fine. I couldn't look at Roxanne and pretend I hadn't heard her say she was tired of waiting. So, I stayed home. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I needed rest. Darlene called twice that week. I let it go to voicemail, called back hours later, and made excuses about running errands, my hip acting up, or anything that wasn't the real reason. She didn't push. She never pushed. In the past, that quality in my youngest daughter had always brought me comfort. She was so easy to be around. She never demanded more time than I was willing to give. But now, faced with that same easygoing nature, I couldn't help but wonder if it was something else. Patience. Perhaps the kind of patience that only comes from someone waiting for a plan to complete itself. That Thursday, Conrad came by with documents for me to look over. "Just some things to update your files," he said. "Nothing urgent." He sat at my kitchen table, relaxed and familiar, just as he always was. Halfway through pouring coffee, he mentioned casually that he'd heard them talking again. "Heard who?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Darlene and Roxanne were on the phone Tuesday." He didn't look up from the papers. "I wasn't trying to listen, Mrs. Denzel. Roxanne mentioned the timing, saying they had to wait until after one of your appointments." I didn't ask which appointment. I knew exactly which one he meant. That Tuesday, I'd gone to see the hip specialist, and Roxanne had asked about it because she always asked about my appointments. For years, she'd known every single one of them. But standing in the kitchen, that video still aching in my chest, that routine concern sounded completely twisted. It wasn't a daughter checking on her mother anymore. It was timing, a plan being managed around my schedule. I didn't tell him any of that. I just nodded, letting him talk about the documents, about the few signatures he needed before the end of the month, things that felt entirely unimportant compared to the sentence he'd just planted, only to walk away like it was nothing. After he left, I sat at the same table for a long time, the coffee in front of me slowly cooling. That night, I picked up my phone twice. Twice, my thumb hovered over Roxanne's name. I wanted to ask her directly. What appointment? What timing? What was she and her sister talking about that Tuesday afternoon? I wanted to hear her voice crack with confusion, or worse, hear it completely flat. The second thought stopped me both times, because if I called her and she answered easy and calm like she had nothing to hide, I wouldn't know if that meant she was innocent, or if it meant she was a master of disguise. I put the phone down, telling myself I'd ask when I was ready to hear any answer. The bank statement arrived on a Monday, tucked between a church bulletin and a senior center flyer. I almost set it aside without opening it, like I usually did. I don't know what possessed me to open it that day instead of letting it sit on the counter with the rest of the mail. In the middle of the page, there was a withdrawal from my investment account for an amount so large I had to sit at the kitchen table to read it twice. I didn't recognize the transaction. I tried to link it to anything I'd done that month, any bill, any repair, any gift for the grandchildren, but I came up with nothing. Then I remembered the documents. 2 weeks ago, the same week I saw the hip doctor, Conrad had come over with a folder saying these files couldn't wait until next month. He explained that some year-end trust adjustments had to be made before the filing deadline, and that delays would cause unnecessary tax complications for the estate. I remember sitting at this same table, my legs still aching from the specialist pressing on my hip that morning, listening half-heartedly as he flipped through papers, pointing to dotted lines. "Just sign here, Mrs. Denzel, and here. I'll make sure everything gets filed on time." I remembered the pen in my hand, the dull pain spreading down my leg, how easy it was to sign where he pointed instead of doing what Theodore always told me, reading every single page before signing once. Theodore used to say, "No matter who brings the paperwork, read it twice before you sign it." I called Conrad that afternoon and asked about the transfer. "Oh, that," he said casually, as if I were asking about the weather. "That was part of the trust adjustments we discussed before the deadline. For tax purposes, Mrs. Denzel, we moved some funds from the investment account into the trust structure for the estate. You signed the authorization the same day you saw the hip doctor. Remember? I walked you through it. I didn't remember him walking me through anything. I only remembered where he pointed and that I signed." "I don't remember the details," I said. "That's okay. That's what I'm here for. You don't need to keep all of that in your head. That's my job." He gave that light, gentle laugh, the same one I'd heard for 18 years whenever I asked a question I thought I should have known the answer to. Theodore used to say the same thing. Let Conrad handle those headaches, Yolanda. That's why we keep him. It was supposed to be comforting. For 18 years, it had been comforting. I told him I just wanted to understand it better. He said he'd bring the documents over on Thursday, and if it would put my mind at ease, he could go through it line by line. He sounded so dismissive, so willing, that I felt foolish for even making the call. Thursday came, and he sat at my table with the same folder again, opening it with his usual practiced ease. A man who had read more of my family's files than I would read in a lifetime. Halfway through his explanation, his phone buzzed on the table. It lit up long enough for me to catch a name I didn't recognize, and then with one smooth motion he flipped the phone over. "My apologies," he said. "Work stuff, you know how it is." I did know. 18 years later, I knew exactly how it was. But I sat there, watching his hand press down on that phone. Since that night in the parking lot, for the first time, I found myself wondering, in those 18 years, what else had I never even thought to ask him to explain a second time? Roxanne showed up on a Saturday without calling first. She hadn't done that since she was a teenager sneaking into the house past curfew. "You've been hiding from us," she said, standing on my porch with her arms crossed. Not unkindly, just straightforward as she always was. "It's been 3 weeks, Mom. Darlene thinks she did something wrong, but I think there's another reason." I let her in because I didn't know how to say no. We sat in the front hall, and she looked at me the way she used to look at me when I was sick and trying to hide it from her as a little girl, like she could see right through anything I was trying to keep hidden. "Is it your hip?" she asked. "Is it money? If something's wrong, you'd tell me, wouldn't you?" I almost wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I hadn't planned what to say next, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Did something happen around the time of the wedding?" I asked carefully, keeping my eyes fixed on her face. "Around that month, was there anything you and Darlene talked about that you might not have thought to tell me?" I watched her face, searching for a crack. I looked for hesitation, for evasiveness, for any clue that the video was real. Instead, her brow furrowed, confused, even nearly hurt. "Around the wedding month? Mom, what are you talking about? We were planning a wedding. We were arguing over floral arrangements, whether Darlene's dress needed one more fitting. What else could there be?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "I was just wondering." "You were just wondering," she repeated slowly, as if rolling the words around, trying to find the subtext I hadn't spoken. "Mom, you've never just wondered about anything in your life. You ask a question, it means you've already got 3 reasons for asking it." I didn't answer. I picked at the edge of my sleeve, looking away anywhere but at her. "Is it about money?" she pushed. "Did someone tell you something about me and Darlene? Because if someone has been in your ear—" "Nobody has been in my ear about anything," I said too quickly. The moment the words were out, I realized how suspicious that sounded. She leaned back and studied me, the way she used to study a patient's chart before making a diagnosis. For a long time, neither of us said a word. "Mom," she finally started, her voice dropping lower, softer, with a frayed edge to it. "Whatever is going on, wherever these things came from, I need you to know one thing. I would never hurt you. Not over money, not over a house, not over anything. You raised us better than that. Even if you hadn't, I love you too much to ever be the reason you're sitting in this house, wearing the look you have on your face right now." I looked at my daughter's face, open, hurt, and defenseless. I thought back to the blurry hallway light, the disjointed voices, the gaps Conrad had filled in with his steady, rehearsed narration. Both things couldn't be true, and sitting there, I no longer knew which one was the lie. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my robe, drinking coffee at the table where Conrad had signed my family's name for so many years. "Mrs. Denzel, this is Patricia Calloway from the Fraud Prevention Department at First Heritage Bank. Do you have a few minutes?" I told her I did, though the word fraud sank like a stone in my stomach before she could even get to the next sentence. "We're calling about some activity on your investment account," she said. "Over the last 2 months, we've flagged 3 transfers that don't match your usual patterns. Larger sums of money were moved to an account not listed in our files as a regular payee. I need to confirm directly with you whether you authorized these transfers." I asked her for the exact amount. She told me. I had to set my coffee cup down because my hands were shaking too hard to hold it. It was more than the transfer I'd already confronted Conrad about. There were 2 more I hadn't even noticed, buried deep in statements I'd only glanced at, trusting that anything passing through those accounts had already been vetted by Conrad. I started, then stopped. I truly didn't know what was real anymore. I authorized one transfer. I thought it was for estate adjustments. But the others, I'm not sure. Can you tell me, Mrs. Denzel, who usually manages these accounts for you? Do you handle them yourself, or does someone assist you? I thought of the 18 years of folders on my kitchen table, the 18 years of let Conrad handle the headaches, the 18 years of signing wherever he pointed because Theodore had taught me to trust him so implicitly. My son-in-law, I said slowly. He's been our family attorney for a long time. He's helped manage things since my husband passed. There was a silence on the other end. Not an empty one, but the kind where someone is carefully choosing their words. I see, Patricia said. Does he have account access? Is he listed as an authorized signer, or does he just advise you on these matters? I didn't actually know. In 18 years, I had never asked the difference. I'll have to check, I admitted. That's fine. I need to ask you one more thing. And I need you to think carefully before you answer, because it will determine our next steps. Her voice was cautious, like a doctor about to deliver news you don't want to hear. Mrs. Denzel, is anyone currently managing your accounts on your behalf? My son-in-law assists me with my accounts, I told Patricia, choosing my words with care. I cannot say that anyone is managing them without my knowledge. Understood. I do need to mention that since he is listed as an authorized signer, our system automatically sent routine alerts to everyone on that list when the transactions were first flagged. This is separate from the service I'm offering you now. If you request it, I can initiate a private trace on these transactions. This would be restricted to only you and the bank. It will not notify any other authorized signers, including him. I told her, yes, trace it. I didn't tell her why my voice sounded so flat and careful, or why I didn't ask the questions a worried woman should have. Is my money safe? Is someone stealing from me? Should I call the police? Instead, I asked how long the trace would take and if Conrad would be specifically notified of this second request. No, she said. This trace is strictly between you and the bank. He may already know about the initial flags because those are automated, but he will not know that you have requested a deeper investigation. Good, I said, and before I was even sure I meant it, I heard myself say it. After I hung up, I sat at the table for a long time. I pulled out an old notebook I'd used years ago for grocery lists and church committee notes, and I started writing down dates. The night in the parking lot, the week I signed the papers, the same week I saw the hip specialist. The way Conrad twisted Roxanne's call about timing into something else. The first transfer I'd confronted him about. I listed them all in a column, as clearly as I could, and stared at how close some of those dates were. I didn't know what I was building yet. I only knew that for the first time since that night I drove across the city to see him. I wasn't just sitting still, waiting for someone else to hand me the next piece of the puzzle. That evening, Conrad showed up uninvited with a small gift bag. A candle, he said, picked out by Darlene. We sat in the front hall, talking about nothing. Grandchildren, the upcoming church anniversary, cases he'd recently settled, work being less hectic. Then, halfway through an unrelated sentence, he dropped it in with such casualness that I almost missed it. Oh, I meant to tell you I handled a little banking issue for you earlier this week. Nothing to worry about. The system just flagged one of the transfers. I made a call and it's all sorted out. I kept my face blank. In just a few weeks, I'd learned how to do that. What kind of flag? I asked, keeping my voice light. Routine stuff, he said, waving a hand. Banks get jumpy about large transfers sometimes. I told them I handle your estate affairs, and it was settled. He gave his usual easy smile. You don't need to give it another thought. I smiled back, but beneath that smile my mind was racing with a speed, clarity, and coldness I hadn't possessed in years. He knew about the first flag. That was just how the system worked, as Patricia had explained. But I had requested something completely different less than 6 hours ago. Something that was supposed to stay strictly between me and the bank. Watching him sip his coffee like a man with nothing to hide, for the first time I began to wonder, is there any difference between what he knows and what he pretends he doesn't? Darlene called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice brighter than it had been in weeks. For a moment I let myself believe that things were going back to normal. Conrad surprised me, she said, laughing. Traded in his old car for a better one. I told him we didn't need it, but you know how he gets when he wants to spoil me. I asked her what kind of car it was. I kept my voice easy. Like you'd ask about the weather or the church service, she told me. And when I casually asked for the price, the way a mother concerned for her daughter's life might, The number she mentioned weighed heavily on my chest long after we hung up. "And this too," she added, still laughing, still light, completely unaware of what her words were doing to me. "He keeps talking about buying a second property, says it's for investment. I told him to slow down, but he says business has been too good lately." I told her that was wonderful. I told her I was happy for them. I don't know how I made my voice sound right, warm, unbothered, while my brain was already racing ahead to the notebook on the kitchen table. After we hung up, I went straight to it. I found the date of the transfer I'd confronted him about weeks ago, the one Conrad called an estate adjustment, the one he claimed I authorized the same week I saw the hip specialist. I found the date of the second transfer, the one Patricia mentioned, the one even larger than the first, the one I hadn't noticed until the bank flagged it. I sat with the notebook and a desk calendar, counting backward from what Darlene had just told me. I didn't know the exact day he bought the car, but I knew it was recent. "Within the last month," she'd said, maybe sooner. And the second transfer, the larger one, had cleared just 11 days before this phone call. 11 days. I sat there, doing the math a woman never wants to do regarding her own daughter's husband. I flipped through the numbers, looking for any other explanation, any possibility that these dates were just a coincidence. Maybe he'd been saving for months. Maybe the money had nothing to do with my account. Maybe I was just a paranoid old woman. But Theodore used to say, "Numbers don't lie, even when people do. Numbers don't get nervous. Numbers don't soften explanations to make you feel better. Numbers just sit there, clear as day, waiting for someone to finally look at them." That night, I looked at them. The 11-day gap between a transfer I never fully approved and the car my daughter told me about so happily. Sitting alone at my kitchen table in the dim light, I realized I could no longer call this a feeling. It was a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. On Wednesday, Patricia called me back. I could tell by her tone that she had found something. "Mrs. Denzel, I want to go through this carefully, so please bear with me." Rustling papers filled the line. The questionable transfers were routed through an LLC called Hill Estate Management Services. I didn't move. "Conrad's company," I said. "Our records show that, yes. The important thing for you to understand is, this account is not new, nor is it hidden. It has been in your account file for years as an approved recipient for legitimate fees related to your estate. That's why earlier transactions never raised concerns. What flagged this time was the change in pattern. The recent transfer amounts were significantly larger than anything historically moved to that account." "So, he used the same account," I said slowly. "An account that, according to our records, he has always used to charge me for his fees." "Yes." I thought of every check I'd signed without hesitation, every invoice I'd never asked him to itemize. Because why would I? Conrad had been handling Theodore's affairs even before those accounts existed. He had built that trust through years of courtesy and competence. And within the comfort of that history, the same account I'd trusted for years had become the center of every problem. "What do I do now?" I asked. "That is your decision. My role is to explain our findings. Whether you choose to escalate this through formal channels, talk to Mr. Hill, or contact law enforcement is entirely up to you. However, from a fraud prevention perspective, I recommend that you ensure your remaining assets are protected before you confront anyone who currently has access to your accounts." I thanked her and we hung up. I sat in the kitchen, my phone still warm in my hand, staring blankly ahead. 18 years. 18 years of folders. 18 years of let Conrad handle the headaches. 18 years where I never asked for an itemized bill, because asking for details from a man who had worked for this family before he even married my daughter felt like an insult. My first instinct was to call Roxanne. Before I'd even fully decided, my thumb was moving toward her name. It was an old, deep-seated longing to hear the voice of someone who loved me say something firm and true. Before the call went through, I stopped myself. If I went to Roxanne now with nothing but the bank's findings and a notebook full of dates, this would become a story before it became evidence. It would turn into finger-pointing at the dinner table, into Delphine caught between her husband and her mother, a mess with no hard proof, a situation no one could walk away from clean. This time, I didn't just need suspicion, I needed something Conrad couldn't argue with. The next morning I went to the bank in person, dressed as formally as if I were going to church. I wanted Patricia to look at me and see a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for. She met me at a small table away from the tellers. I told her straight, I wanted an immediate freeze on all my accounts for any transaction related to Conrad's access. "I want to be clear about my request," I said. "I'm not asking you to investigate him yet. I'm asking you to prevent any further movement of funds until I figure out what's been happening." Patricia nodded, pulling something up on her screen. "Tennessee has specific protections for this. Mrs. Denzel, once an account holder reports suspected financial exploitation, we are allowed to freeze suspicious activity without notifying the suspected party. This law exists specifically to ensure vulnerable account holders aren't tipped off, meaning we protect you from being put in danger by alerting someone who might be taking advantage of you." "He won't know, right?" I asked. "Not from our end. The freeze takes effect today. Any further transfers related to his access will be blocked, and we will flag any future attempts to move money through that LLC account." She looked up at me with a touch of gentleness. "Now, I want you to know this is the right step. Many people in your position wait too long because they're afraid of what it means about the people they trust. You didn't wait." I didn't tell her how many weeks I'd waited, agonizing, hoping for an explanation that wouldn't turn this man into a monster. I'd watched him stand up at my husband's funeral as if he had lost a father, too. I signed where needed, then drove home with my hands steadier on the steering wheel than they had been in a month. For the first time since that night in the parking lot, I felt something in my chest other than fear. It wasn't relief. Not yet. It was something calmer. A sense that although the rest of the house was still wide open, at least one door had finally been locked. That evening, my phone rang. Conrad's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I did, because not answering would tell him things had changed before he even knew. "Mrs. Denzel?" His voice came through, bright and easy, completely devoid of the tension from that night across the city. "I was wondering, could I come by this weekend to check in on some estate documents? Nothing major, just want to get things organized before the end of the month." I sat there motionless, listening to this man talk. He had no idea, not even the slightest suspicion, that the account he'd used for 18 years had been quietly shut down. "Of course," I told him, my voice just as warm and unbothered as his. "This weekend is fine." The consultant's name was Marcia Beaumont, a petite and rigorous woman whom Patricia had recommended. She'd spent 20 years cleaning up exactly these kinds of messes for families who no longer knew who to trust. I sat in a quiet office downtown across from her, laying it all out. The bank's tracking, the LLC, the dates in my notebook. Then, after a long pause, I told her about the video. I hadn't planned on mentioning it, but watching her so calmly and confidently piece together the financial trail, I found I wanted someone else to finally see that other thing too. The thing that started it all, the thing I'd been carrying alone since that night in the parking lot. She asked if I had a copy. I didn't. Conrad had only played it from his own phone that night and never offered to send it. When I asked Darlene later if Conrad had a habit of backing up his phone, she remembered something I'd never noticed. A few months ago, after getting a new phone, he'd enabled auto cloud backups to a family-shared storage account so they wouldn't lose old photos and videos. Darlene still had access. It took Marcia less than an hour to find the file among hundreds of ordinary recordings. 3 days later, she called me back. "Mrs. Denzel, I need to explain this carefully." On the other end of the line, files rustled on her desk. The financial trail matches the bank's description perfectly. Transfers, LLC, dates, everything lines up. From what I've reviewed, the evidence is very solid. As for the video, she paused for a moment. "I don't think what you saw was a complete recording." "What do you mean?" "The audio has been edited. There are abrupt waveform shifts and compression differences that shouldn't exist in a continuous recording. I can't tell you yet why someone would edit it, but I can tell you it wasn't saved in its original form." I closed my eyes. So it was tampered with. Yes. Once I compared it to the backup files in the cloud account, it became clear. She paused before continuing. "The conversation about the wedding seating arrangement is real. That's where you heard someone say, 'before she changes her mind again.' But they weren't talking about you. They were talking about Darlene's mother-in-law changing the guest count." My hand tightened on the phone. "The rest came from earlier recordings," Marcia continued. "Conversations months apart. One discussion involved your husband's estate, when both daughters were frustrated and complaining about waiting on financial decisions. Those clips were taken out of context and stitched together next to the wedding conversation to create a dialogue that never actually happened. I sat there, saying nothing. Every Sunday dinner I'd missed, Every call I'd let ring, every hour I'd spent doubting two daughters who had never given me a reason to doubt them. "There's one more thing," Marcia said gently. I checked the file history itself. I braced myself. The metadata saved in the cloud backup shows the original recording date for each segment. It also shows when that edited version was first created. "Tell me." He stitched together the final video 3 days before the wedding. I didn't answer. For the first time since that night in the parking lot, I understood that this wasn't an impulse. This had been planned. I asked them both to come to the house on a Sunday, but I didn't tell them why. Roxanne arrived first, still in her work clothes, scanning my face as she always did when she suspected something was wrong. Delphine arrived 20 minutes later, more relaxed, completely unaware that the floor of her marriage was about to be pulled out from under her. I sat them down in the front hall and told them everything. I started from that night across the city, the video, and what I thought I'd heard. I watched Roxanne's face shift from confusion to a sharper look. It looked almost like an epiphany, like the missing piece she never knew was gone had finally clicked into place. Delphine's face, however, turned into something else entirely. Pale, then incredibly rigid. The stiffness of someone who has already foreseen a conclusion they don't want to accept. I told them about the bank, the transfers, and the LLC with Conrad's name on it. I told them about the freeze. Then, because I owed her more than I'd owed anyone in a long time, I turned directly to Roxanne. "I need to say a few things to you, and I need you to hear every one of them." My voice shook, but I went on. "For 3 months, I pushed you away. I let you stand on my porch and tell me you would never hurt me. And I came back inside that night and still wasn't sure if I should believe you. I missed dinners. I missed calls. I let a lie take away something between us that I can't get back. And the person I targeted was you, Roxanne. Not some imagined version of you. Just you. I'm sorry. I was wrong to let this drag on for so long. I should have come to you the first moment something felt wrong instead of carrying it alone." Roxanne didn't speak for a long time. Her eyes were wet, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "You should have come to me a long time ago, Mom. But I understand why you didn't. He's good. He was always very good at making people feel like he was the only honest person in the room." Delphine made a faint sound beside her, almost like a laugh, though there was nothing funny about it. 18 years, she said quietly. "He sat in this house for 18 years, and I never once—" She stopped, covering her mouth with her hand. When she spoke again, her voice had gone rigid, something I'd never heard from my youngest before. "He spied on us. He turned our discussion about flowers into something that made you fear us. He let you sit alone in pain for months, all because of something he invented himself." "Delphine," I said carefully, watching a look settle in her eyes that worried me. "I need you to stay calm now. We have evidence. We have bank records. We have Marcia's report. We are ready to take the right legal action." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm going to talk to him," she said, "tonight." "Delphine, wait." But she was already reaching for her car keys, and the determination on her face told me that no amount of careful planning would stop her tonight. An hour later, Delphine called me. Her trembling voice told me that her conversation with Conrad hadn't gone as either of them had expected. "He didn't deny it, Mom. Not really. He kept saying there was an explanation, that I was jumping to conclusions, that if we sat down and looked at the documents together, everything would make sense." She paused. Then he started talking about how complicated everything was, how I didn't understand the pressure he'd been under. Her voice broke. "I told him I knew about the freeze. I shouldn't have told him. I wasn't thinking. I felt the floor swaying beneath me. Delphine, where is he now?" "He left. I don't know where he went. I knew where he was going before he rang my doorbell 20 minutes later. He stood on my porch, lacking the easy smile I'd known for 18 years. He gripped a folder tightly, his collar slightly open. He still looked like Conrad, composed, professional, every inch the attorney I'd once trusted. But there was something different in his eyes, a restlessness that hadn't been there before. "Mrs. Denzel, we need to talk." His voice was calm, almost soothing, though I could hear the tension hidden beneath it. "There's been a misunderstanding with the accounts. I can fix it, but I need you to sign something tonight." I stood at the door, unmoving. "What kind of something, Conrad?" After I stepped aside, he walked into the hall and placed the folder on the table where he'd sat for nearly 2 decades. He opened it carefully, smoothing the pages as if this were just a regular meeting. "This is a transfer document to temporarily move the Elmwood property into a protective trust," he said, "just until the bank completes all their reviews. Once things are over, it can all be transferred back. If the review expands, this is me trying to keep your assets from being caught in the middle." "You're trying to move my house out," I said slowly. "Move it into something that bears your name, while a bank investigation is already underway." His expression barely changed. "That's not how it is." "Then explain it to me plainly, just like you always have. No folders, no signatures, just words." For a moment he tried. "For 18 years, you trusted me," he said softly. "I've protected this family's interests longer than Delphine and I have been married. One misunderstanding shouldn't erase all of that." "That was no misunderstanding," I said. "That was 3 transfers, an edited video, and documents you had me sign without asking enough questions." A flicker of emotion crossed his face. At first, it wasn't anger, it was resignation. "You have no idea what I did for this family," he said, his voice tightening. "I built your husband's estate plan from nothing. I sat in rooms with lawyers twice my age to ensure his 30 years of hard work had no loopholes. I handled every contract, every dispute, every late-night call when things went wrong. And I never sent you a bill that reflected the actual value of that work. So you decided to take it yourself rather than ask." His composure finally crumbled. "I decided," he said, his voice cracking, "that in this house, no one would ever pay me what I was worth. Year after year, there were endless favors, endless emergencies, and the empty checks of, 'We'll settle up later.'" He took a step toward me. "You have no idea what I've paid for this family over the last 18 years, and no one ever thought to ask what it cost me. For the first time since I'd known him, I felt something akin to fear in my own front hall. Not because he was shouting, but because this man I'd trusted for nearly 2 decades finally stopped pretending he believed he was innocent." I didn't answer him. I reached into my cardigan pocket. I'd kept my phone there since the moment Delphine called to tell me he'd left her place in a rage. I dialed the direct number Marcia had given me days earlier. "He's here," I said calmly, not taking my eyes off Conrad. "He's in my home right now, demanding that I sign more documents." The investigator's voice remained calm. "Don't argue with him. Don't sign anything. If it's safe, keep him there. We're nearby." I hung up. Conrad's expression shifted. The anger faded, replaced by something close to disbelief. "What are you doing?" "Doing what I should have done weeks ago," I said. He looked at the folder still spread across the table, at the unsigned page waiting for my signature. I watched him start to calculate, just as he always calculated, trying to find an angle that would let him regain control. There were no angles left. A few minutes later, headlights swept across my front window. No flashing lights, no blaring sirens, just 2 ordinary cars pulling silently into the driveway. Marcia had explained days earlier that once the bank completed the handoff and I agreed to cooperate, the investigators would formally open a case. They'd also warned me that if Conrad discovered his access to the accounts had changed, he might try to convince me to sign additional documents before figuring out what was really going on. If that happened, I was to call immediately, and they would handle the rest. Tonight, clearly, was the situation they'd been prepared to handle all along. 2 investigators came to my door, calm and professional. They called out Conrad Hill's full name, then walked into the house. He stood rigid in my hall, the folder on the table forgotten. His gaze shifted between them and me, still seemingly unable to believe that the woman who had signed wherever he pointed for 18 years was the one who had made that call. "Mr. Hill," one of the investigators said, "we're from the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. We'd like you to come with us regarding an active investigation into suspected financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery of estate documents." "An active investigation," Conrad repeated softly. "Opened several weeks ago." For the first time since he walked through my front door, he had nothing to say. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for the folder. He just stood there, listening to the investigator inform him of the next steps, then was escorted out. I heard the sound of another car door closing and turned toward the porch. Delphine stood in the shadows, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Roxanne stood beside her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Neither spoke as Conrad was led toward the waiting cars. The night was unnervingly quiet, broken only by the investigator's low voice and the soft click of car doors. Delphine watched until the cars disappeared at the end of the street. Then she turned to me, and the calmness on her face scared me more than tears ever could. "I want a divorce," she said quietly. 6 weeks later, Conrad was formally charged: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and 3 counts related to forged estate documents. Marcia told me the financial trail alone was enough. But that video, once the complete footage surfaced, made it impossible for anyone to call this a family misunderstanding anymore. The prosecutor's office said it was one of the cleanest cases they'd seen in years. Every date lined up, every transfer could be traced, and every lie remained exactly where it belonged. I hired a new attorney to handle the estate, a woman named Kara Whitfield. She insisted on itemized lists and quarterly reviews, the very supervision I should have demanded 18 years ago, back when trust itself seemed like enough. She helped me recover most of the funds that could be recovered, not all of it, but enough. Delphine's divorce went through quickly, cleaner than we ever expected. With no children involved, there was no shared property to split. Beyond the assets the court was already clearing out as part of the larger case against him. She moved back into her old apartment for a while, and later she bought a small house of her own. The deed has her name on it, and no one else's. Now she mostly comes over on Sundays, just like she used to do before any of this started. Roxanne does too. We sit at the same kitchen table, the one where Conrad used to spread out his folders with such ease. For the longest time, none of us talked about him at all. We talk about Roxanne's promotion at the hospital. We talk about Darlene's garden and the tomatoes she can never seem to keep the rabbits away from. We talk about things that don't matter, the way a family should be able to, without anyone trying to steer the conversation toward some calculated angle. One Sunday, Roxanne asked me gently how I was really doing. Not the perfunctory answer I give most people, but the truth. I told her I'd spent a long time in this house feeling like I had failed at the most basic thing, something a mother shouldn't have to be taught, knowing who to trust and who not to. I told her I'd replayed that night across the city in my head 1,000 times, wondering what I should have asked, what I should have noticed sooner. "You did notice," she said. "You just took a little while to believe what you were seeing." After she left that night, I sat with that thought for a long time. I walked through the house more slowly than I used to, passing the room that used to be Theodore's office. It still faintly carried the scent of the cedar shelves he'd built himself, and it still held the chair where he used to sit with his own folders, decades before Conrad ever touched a single one of them. For the first time in years, I sat down in that chair. He thought a lie could make me small enough to be controlled. Instead, it taught me that I am still more than capable of protecting the things that matter most.